Good morning and welcome to the 2023 Bampton Lectures here at the University Church. Welcome to those of you who are physically here and those of you who are watching online. My name's Jane Shaw and I'm the chair of the Bampton Trustees. The Bampton Lectures were founded by the will of the Reverend John Bampton, who died in 1751 and first took place here in the University Church in 1780. There used to be a set of lectures on a Sunday morning, and by the early 21st century, they were perhaps less well attended than they had been in the 18th century. And so we changed it to this weekday format, which seems to work much better. It is really my enormous pleasure and honor to introduce our 2023 lecturer, Willie James Jennings, Associate Professor of Systematic Theology and Africana Studies at Yale Divinity School. Willie is one of the most creative, imaginative, and distinguished theologians writing and teaching today. So I count us very fortunate to have his presence in Oxford with us, and I think the audience here, physically here, shows that. Professor Jennings is the author of The Christian Imagination, Theology and the Origins of Race, published by Yale University Press in 2010, which won the American Academy of Religion Award of Excellence in the study of religion in the constructive reflective category, and also the Gruer-Meyer Award in Religion, which is the largest prize for a theological work in North America. Professor Jennings' second book was a commentary on the book of Acts titled Acts, a Commentary, The Revolution of the Intimate, published by Westminster John Knox. And I know that some people here at the University Church have been using that as a Bible study this term. I mentioned to a colleague that Willie was coming to be our Bampton lecturer, and he said his book on Acts is the very best book of biblical scholarship that I have ever read. It accordingly received the 2018 Academy of Parish Clergy Book Award and was much deserved. His most recent book, After Whiteness, An Education in Belonging, which was published by Erdman's in 2020, won the 2020 Book of the Year Award from Publishers Weekly, and for anyone in theological education, you should read this book. Willie is also a poet, though he described himself at breakfast as a closet poet, but I do believe that he may even read one of his poems today, so less closet poet than open poet today. Professor Jennings is also an ordained Baptist minister. He served several churches in North Carolina, some with his wife, Joanne. And before joining the faculty of Yale Divinity School in 2015, he taught at Duke Divinity School for 25 years and was for 10 of those years academic dean. Professor Jennings is the first African American to deliver the Bampton Lectures. Given that this is the year 2023, that moment has been too late in coming. And I am personally so glad, more than glad, that you are here, Willie. Thank you. Professor Jennings, yes. Professor Jennings' 2023 Bampton Lectures are titled Jesus and the Displaced, Christology and the Redemption of Habitation. This is how we'll be doing things. He will deliver the first two lectures this morning, one at 10 o'clock. We'll finish at about 11. There'll be no questions at that point, but there will be coffee and tea for those physically here. We hope that if you're watching at home, online, or in your office, you will go off and make your own tea and coffee. And then we'll come back at 11:30 for the second lecture. So welcome to Professor Willie James Jennings, who is going to talk to us about Mary, Jesus, and the dwelling condition and interpretation.
Good morning. It is a great joy and a high honor for me to be here with you today and to be giving these lectures. I want to first thank Dr. Jane Shaw, her brilliant assistant, Kate Wilson, and the entire Harris Manchester community for such a warm welcome. and such kindness shown to me and my wonderful family. And I want to thank the staff of University Church for their kindness to me and my family as we have come. I am not alone here today. I am accompanied by my beautiful and brilliant wife and partner in ministry, the Reverend Joanne Brown Jennings. Joe, would you please stand so people could see you? We're also accompanied by our wonderful daughters, Jerry Jennings and Sophia Jennings, who are here. I won't embarrass them by making them stand, but they are also here. And dear family and friends who are here, Dr. Randall Jelks, brilliant scholar, has written the definitive work on Benjamin Mays. He is here, has traveled to hear these lectures. I very much appreciate Dr. Jelks. Our dear family friends, Pat and Jean Wardley, come from Northern California, and so glad that they are here as well. And as I look out and see people who I've known for many years, it's good to see you as well. Friends, I bring you warmest greetings from Dean Gregory Sterling, the faculty, the staff, and the students of Yale Divinity School, where I have the joy of serving. Yale University and my home in Hamden, Connecticut, sits on the unceded lands of Algonquin-speaking peoples. And it is my hope and goal that as I live on those lands, to be a part of caring for those lands as those peoples have, and to work for the day when those unceded lands are given back to those peoples. I am the last child of Ivory and Mary Jennings, sharecroppers who picked cotton in the southern part of the United States, and then moved to the northern part, to the state of Michigan and the city of Grand Rapids, where I was raised. I owe everything to Ivory and Mary Jennings. They introduced me to the God who saved me, to the community of faith that taught me, and to the dirt that sustains me. It is in their honor that I offer these lectures. And in so doing, I invoke the ancestors, those saints of God, the cloud of witnesses who even now, dear friends, even now, are with us in the presence of the God we serve. As Dr. Shaw said, the overarching title of my lectures is Jesus and the Displaced, Christology and the Redemption of Habitation. And the lecture for today, Mary, Jesus, and the dwelling condition and interpretation. My friends, the problem of our time is the problem of dwelling. But dwelling has always been a challenge. It is important to know the difference between a problem and a challenge for those of us who are Christian. A challenge is something that has been with us from the beginning, from the first moment that we realized we were followers of a God made specific, made discernible in the faith of a people called Israel, and in the flesh of one of their own. Dwelling is a challenge of bringing our whole selves into communion with God through that one, following that one. But dwelling is also a problem of the building and of the body. A problem is, theologically speaking, something that is of the moment, formed in a history not of our own choosing or making, formed to demand from us a response of faith that confronts the problem. Dwelling as a problem of the building brings us to the current crisis of housing. securing livable and loving places to thrive under the regimes of real estate and private property, and their unrelenting logics for creating spaces. The problem of dwelling also brings us to forced mobility through war, famine, economic strangulation, environmental degradation, and violence. Yet whether we are talking about forced mobility or voluntary migration, there is, my friends, something disturbing about our patterns of mobility, which is profoundly intertwined with our bodies. Dwelling as a problem of the body brings us to the color line and the geographic line and the tragedy of displacement, that is, bodies displaced, floating in space and time on anguish and anxiety and commerce. This displacement grew out of the effects of modern colonialism and its deep body and earth wounding. That deep wounding has also meant the emergence of a bodily consciousness disconnected from the built environment. The term built environment, as I will use it in these lectures, refers to small worlds created by small hands, human and more than human hands. The built environment is the constellation of buildings, roads, waterways, landscapes, animal habitat, communities, towns, cities, formed by design. And the problem of dwelling in this regard means the ways our designs of place distort and destroy us through isolation, segregation, and strangulation, and how that harm takes built form. And we accept that form. The problem of dwelling and the challenge of dwelling enfold one another. They constitute what I call the dwelling condition. The difficulty in addressing the dwelling condition is trying to connect the dots in the minds of so many, connecting the racial relation to the geographic relation, connecting the racial imagination and the geographic imagination and the work of designing, connecting the body with the built environment, connecting the forming of bodies and identities with the creation of buildings, neighborhoods, communities, townships, and immigration offices. And all of it, dear friends, to the life of God. These lectures cannot possibly connect all those dots. But we will commit to the work of connecting by pinpointing that which resists dwelling and thwarts us becoming habitation. I will, in these lectures, call upon the spirit of the poet and the storyteller, interspersing poems, both my own and others, as well as short vignettes to aid us in identifying that resistance. I will also draw in these lectures on a conversation partner to aid me in my diagnostic task, specifically a work of extraordinary insight written at a moment of prescient genius, before the civil rights movement in the United States would take form, before something called liberation theology would mark a global theological beginning, and before a vision of life beyond segregation would capture the minds of many. That conversation partner is the theologian and mystic Howard Washington Thurman. Howard Thurman was born November 18th, 1899 in Dayton Beach, Florida, in the United States, in the time when white supremacy knew no shame, only its power and its desire fulfilled in suppressing black flesh. Through an education at Morehouse College in Atlanta, Georgia, graduate education at what was then Rochester Theological Seminary, now Colgate Rochester Colzer Divinity School in upstate New York, and through a celebrated career of firsts, including being the first dean of Rankin Chapel at Howard University in Washington, D.C., then the first black dean at Marsh Chapel at Boston University, and a professor on the faculty of Boston University School of Theology, and then, and in between, being the co-founder of the Church for the Fellowship of All People in San Francisco, a remarkable community that was intentionally ecumenical, pluralist, and strategically interracial. Thurman expressed a life filled with remarkable insight and wisdom. Now, my friends, I could not possibly do justice to the thought of Howard Thurman in these lectures, nor do I seek to capture the complexity and the majesty of his life. My goal is much more modest: to bring Thurman alongside my exploration in our time of thinking the dwelling condition as a diagnostic partner and as a spiritual guide. And in so doing, to think alongside Thurman in a moment of captured insight, a moment of distilled wisdom that is found in his 1949 text, Jesus and the Disinherited. This book, if you have not read it, I urge you to read it. This book was to become, as historian Paul Harvey tells us, a parenting text for both the civil rights movement in the United States and Black liberation theology globally. Taking its cues from what would now be called the intrinsic realities of the Western world's anti-Blackness, Jesus and the Disinherited articulated breathtaking spiritual direction for the poor and the oppressed, those who Thurman designated as people who stand, in his memorable phrase, with their backs against the wall. The book was a Christological intervention into the ways fear, deception, and hatred mingle the human spirit, offering us a portrait of the life of Jesus and what he called the religion of Jesus. Thurman situated what would famously be called the love ethic of Jesus as the central energy and reality that would rehabilitate the human spirit and redeem humanity. Thurman's account of the reality of disinheritance in Jesus and the Disinherited is precisely the terrain on which the modern built environment has come to exist. It is also the exact terrain on which we can discern the dwelling condition. I want us to think those three realities: fear, deception, and hatred. To think those three realities in relation to the built environment and in relation to the fabrications of a self and the formation of our subjectivities. Thurman's profound insight in this book grew in great measure out of the wisdom of his grandmother, Nancy Ambrose, who had been a slave and who understood and resisted a Christianity in a world formed through the plantation. Thurman lived in the space of his grandmother's testimony, and from that space, he considered the Christianity formed on what I call, borrowing from the famed New Testament scholar W.D. Davies, terra Christiana. Terra Christiana. By terra Christiana, I mean the creation of Christian-inspired and instigated places of captivity, born of the spiritual realities of the plantation, where we saw interlocking systems of enclosure, segregation, silencing, exploitation, surveillance, and extraction. Terra Christiana, however, quickly outstrips Christianity and has now taken on a life of its own, establishing orders of ownership and control woven in violence and theft. What emerged from these modern colonial beginnings is the state of unfreedom. The state of unfreedom, not simply of the body, but also how we build and how we design our concrete living. Unfreedom in this regard is the ongoing forms of modern captivity woven in and with the built environment. Let's call it the afterlife of the plantation. The questions of habitation that we must face with these lectures are these. Have the configurations of the built environment, organized through the logics of capital, placed all of us in the Western world in an unrelenting reality of unfreedom? Has the formation of modern private property and home ownership generated its own counterfeit freedom that deepens our captivity down to the bone and the dirt? And then the third question, have we surrendered the gospel at the site, S-I-T-E, at the site of the built environment by refusing to imagine the redemption of real estate, development, architecture, city planning, and in our lives in place? It is exactly these questions that compel me to follow Thurman and yet walk differently through the life of Jesus than him. The life of Jesus captures what should always be thought together: the building, the body, and the design. The building, the body, and the design. Extending Jesus's flesh into this vital work. I use the word building here as both noun and verb, and that dual connotation must also now include the word design, and even the idea of the body itself. As nouns, they draw our attention to structures of habitation and the intentionality that gets embedded in those structures: a building, a body, and a design. As verbs, they draw us to thinking about how we imagine, desire, and create living now and especially into the future, and who exercises that power to create and fashion. By placing the body between building and design, I am not imagining the old mind-body dualism, the body housing the soul. Placing the body between building and design recognizes that we, together, we are an ongoing work of creation. The phrase that you all know, a creatio continua, building, embodying, and designing, drawn into a constant tearing down and building back up, and a constant rethinking and redrawing. To think, these three together, the building, the body, and the design, is precisely what has been missing in modern thought, what has been missing in Christian theology and Christian practice. We have separated in our thinking and living that which should never have been thought in a divided way. The redemption of each must be seen in view of the other. My lectures will draw attention to unfreedom covered by a freedom fabricated with the building, the body, and the design, one that entices peoples into turning their creative energies toward captivity, precisely in the ways we inhabit and design habitation. By calling into question our industries of habitation and the modern nation states that inhere in and with them as a continuation of terra Christiana, am I like the proverbial barefoot child walking up to a massive edifice and kicking it with my bare feet, thinking that I will do it harm to what hovers over me? Possibly. I am seeking in these lectures to discern the salvation of habitation, and in so doing, to seek the overcoming of our displacement, as Thurman sought the overcoming of disinheritance. And all thinking through salvation challenges us to engage the unthinkable, to envision change where change is often seen as impossible. Building, embodying, and designing need a shared liberation, a shared redemption. A poem for us entitled Waiting. This just happened yesterday, everywhere. She crossed the fence, over the line, through the known but unremembered gate where we all started, where she did not wish to explore, but found herself there. An abrupt presence, surrendered by law, waiting for that mercy found at the beginning, but now was missing, lost somewhere between rocks and sand and sea. To think habitation inside dwelling, we must begin where it all begins for us. It begins with Mary. If we wish to intervene in the problem of displacement theologically, building from Thurman's intervening in the problem of disinheritance, then we must, like Thurman, turn to Jesus, but now with Mary. To speak of Mary, the mother of Jesus, is to invoke a world and a way of being in this world. Everything about dwelling for us begins with Mary. It remains a strange fact that reflection on Jesus is often distance from reflection on Mary. Most Christologies that scale the heights of technical acumen and conceptual sophistication give scant consideration to Mary. This is not to deny that Mariology and Christology developed under different theoretical pressures and different devotional regimes, but that difference carries little persuasive power if we take Mary seriously. Yet what does it mean to take Mary seriously? This has been a question that has haunted Christian thought from the beginning. But let's add to that question, what does it mean to take Mary seriously with a view toward habitation? We must hold Mary close to Jesus. This would be akin to the way Thurman held first century Palestinian Jewish life close to Jesus. And I quote, how different might have been the story of the last 2,000 years on this planet, grown old from suffering, if the link between Jesus and Israel had never been severed. What might have happened if Jesus had been permitted to remain where his roots would have been fed by the distilled elements accumulated from Israel's wrestling with God? End of quote from Thurman. Thurman imagined that such closeness of Jesus to his Jewishness would have yielded a different Christianity, one constituted in solidarity with the poor and oppressed, and structurally fortified against the seductions of power. Yet such closeness was not permitted through the long centuries of supersessionist conjuring, of replacing Israel with the church. The permission we seek is to give Mary her full humanity by keeping Jesus close to her. This means thinking alongside her into the God-drenched reality that was her life. Such thinking quickly abandons any desire to locate the historical Mary, that is, to strip away centuries of theological reflection and spiritual discernment to recalibrate a history of Mary. My thinking alongside Mary will not be a historical quest to locate the real Mary, but it will shun the instrumentalization of Mary's body, the turning of her into a tool for God's use. It will also resist deploying her life for creating regimes of purity that colonize sexuality. I will seek to show the importance of Mary for dwelling while resisting mapping metaphor across her body. Here I will follow the wisdom of the Catholic theologian Elizabeth Johnson, who reminds us what Mary is not. And I quote, Mary is not a model, a type, an archetype, a prototype, an icon, a representative figure, a theological idea, an ideological cipher, a metaphor, a utopian principle, a feminine principle, a feminine essence, the image of the internal feminine, an ideal disciple, ideal woman, ideal mother, a myth, a persona, a corporate personality, and every woman, a cultural artifact, a literary device, a motif, an exemplar, a paradigm, a sign, or in any other way, a religious symbol. All of these terms are drawn from contemporary religious writings. To the contrary, Dr. Johnson says, as with any human being, as with every woman, she is first and foremost herself. I will also seek a Mary who was first and foremost herself, but at the same time, Theotokos, the God-bearer. The Mary I will seek is one who, in Thurman's words, lives with her back against the wall, not only because she is poor, peasant, living under Roman occupation, but also because she is called by God. God calls Mary, and callings are always an invitation to enact, to make visible trust in God. Mary's calling exists then in two senses. There is the calling to Mary, and then there is the calling of Mary. The calling to Mary means that she will embody the prophetic, expressing in Israel the prophet's legacies of tension in declaring the word of God in the presence of opposition to her very truth that God is in fact with her. We should understand her as someone called by God into ministry and witness. Mary is inside the story of Israel's way with its creator, agreeing to the specific contours of their life with God. The called Mary, the prophet Mary, is crucial for us, and yet the Annunciation has a second sense of calling that's well known, but underappreciated and under-theologized. There is the calling of Mary. She will take on the task of being the mother of Jesus. God asks Mary to be God's mother. This request unfolds beyond the words of the angel in the Gospel of Luke. It is an unfolding already implied in the words of the angel. Greetings, favored one, the Lord is with you. Here is where we must see the vulnerability of God and the grace of Mary. We, like so many in the history of the church, must pause at the mystery of the Annunciation and the Incarnation. Mary will be God-bearer, but she will also be the pedagogue of God, the teacher of God, orienting her son to life with the God of Israel, and at the same time, life in the land. I want to acknowledge the singularity of Mary, not as a model of motherhood, but as the Catholic theologian M. Sean Copeland notes, Mary will enflesh the freedom of God. And with Mary, it is the freedom to be taught and the freedom for Mary to teach. She will guide Jesus in his humanity as a mother might do. There is, however, no historical evidence, no historical record of this guidance, no canonical or extra-canonical evidence to support my claims here, my friends. We have no evidence that Mary held Jesus to her breast and fed him, and like other mothers might do, spoke and sang to him while she fed him. We have no evidence that she washed him, and in so doing caressed and washed over every part of his body. We have no evidence that she covered him when he was cold and uncovered him in the heat and allowed him to feel the sun on his skin and taught him the word for sun. We have no record that she sat on the ground with him, as many mothers might do, and showed him how to touch the dirt, that she put her hand on a tree and said to him the word for tree, or held up a seed to him and said the word for seed. We have no evidence that Mary taught Jesus anything. But do we need evidence? If we grant him his humanity and grant him Mary his mother, then I am on solid ground to say that Mary tells him his story. Or more precisely, my friends, brings him into her story, as any mother present to her child would do. Yet to say any mother is not to claim some universal mothering instinct active in Mary. I am suggesting Mary took seriously the task of teaching God. Mary is the door to Jesus' learning of the land and the ways of his people with the land. He learns from her and from his people about the seed and plants and crops, harvest, rain, water. Mary is the first storyteller for Jesus, who introduces him to life with the dirt, with fish and wind and the sea and the mountains and the story of Israel, his people. This is certainly speculation, but it has good roots in belief in a woman who has voice, who has choice, who has freedom, and commitment to a child given by the Holy Spirit. It is also confirmed by believing in a God who listens and who intensifies that listening in Jesus. Jesus is the intensification of listening to the land from the sight, S-I-T-E, of the creature. It recalls for me my own mother, whose name just happened to also be Mary, and who invited me to become a garden disciple. Another poem entitled Garden Disciple. She called me to the garden, that ritual of spring, announcing new life. There my mother, on bended knee, in black Michigan dirt, as if praying like in church or at her bed, made me join her on the ground, now made ready through her sweat and knowledge and water. Reach your hand in deep, she demanded, and I knew what my obedience would mean. Now I would feel the wet soil covering my hand, enveloping my wrist, pulling up my arm, pulling me in. Boy, that's life, she would say. Do you feel it? The blank stare on my face, covered with boredom, told her I did not. I was spring and too young to feel soil knowledge. She smiled and told me to go get her seeds, dried and stored, hidden from winter for such a time as this. Her planting begun, her mind focused on a future that only she could see in the ground, each spot chosen for the plant that would bear witness. Soon her time of planting would be done. My time of planting has now come. Imagine the other Mary, Mother Mary, guiding the child Jesus in earth touch, what to eat and what not to eat, what to notice and what to be awed by. Jesus learns from Mary of his people's oneness with the earth and their life of thanksgiving, thankfulness to God for the gifts of life given by the God of Israel, who is indeed his God. Jesus also learns from Mary that he is that promised gift rooted in the land itself. Thus, Mary is the first storyteller. Mary, as first storyteller, is the earth storyteller who situates her child, the child of God in the creation, and in this way, he hears the earth itself speaking through his own mother. This is where dwelling must begin, and where the redemption of habitation begins, where Jesus comes to the knowledge of place through the body. We find Mary guiding him in what it will mean to dwell and know through dwelling. It begins with Jesus being positioned by his mother to allow the earth to speak to him, and through him at the same time that he will allow God to speak to him and through him. Now, we are not talking about the same kind of expression and therefore the same kind of speech. Mary holds Jesus in what the anthropologist Eduardo Kahn would call the semiosis of the world, shown through plant and water, bird and donkey and every animal, through planting and harvesting, each and all communicating by enveloping him in the moving and responding, the acting and reacting, the reciprocity of living creatures, and thereby giving Jesus insight into hearing and knowing. Jesus will in turn inhabit with his mother the semiosis of the world. Mary will also bring Jesus into her story of scandal and threat and escape. She must have told him that death and its agents sought to kill him when he was just a baby. Again, more speculation on my part. These agents were people who had given themselves to violence and fear of a future that they could not control, according to Matthew. Mary knew movement, uninvited, but necessary for survival. Mary knew fleeing and looking over her shoulder and thirsting for safety and vigilantly watching for danger, and with it all, trusting in God. If Jesus was a child like any other child, he could sense this, even if he could not see this, even if it was not spoken by his mother. But it was spoken because he repeats it in his ministry, in his words, and in his body. What is crucial for us to note here is that through Mary, Jesus entered the struggle of dwelling with its relentless processes of being displaced, of being hunted by violence, and made painfully itinerant. Might an echo of that struggle be heard in those famous words, "Foxes have holes and birds of the air have nests, but the Son of Man has nowhere to lay his head." Yet might we also hear in these words wisdom learned from looking and listening to foxes and birds and the ways they seek habitation. Jesus enables then a new kind of depth speech. Jesus is the voice of God who gives voice. He gives voice first by remaining always in his mother's earth teaching and always in the contours of trusting God formed with his mother's struggle. He will add to that Mary-formed teaching and trusting the reality of an invitation born of his own life with God, his Father, and his life in the Spirit. It will be an offer to join him in giving voice to the will of God for Israel and the speaking of the earth precisely at the site of his body. This one who speaks from the depths will constitute a place of dwelling. To understand Jesus as constituting a place of dwelling reframes the way we have come to think of his relation to land through concepts of territoriality. Concepts of territoriality have been the dominant way through which we have interpreted Jesus' mission and ministry to Israel in relation to the land. Take, for example, the argument from the scholar I mentioned earlier, W.D. Davies, in his famed text, The Gospel and the Land, Early Christianity and Jewish Territorial Doctrine, where he argued that Jesus' ministry de-emphasize territoriality, the territoriality of Israel's covenant faith, and turn that faith toward his own body. Davies saw in Jesus the deliberate displacement of holy places and holy land by a person. For Davies, Christianity was not place-centered, but person-centered, and that person was God incarnate. There were not many options with Davies' construal of things. Either we operate in a territorial vision of land and life, through which possession of land is essential to the performance of our faith and our well-being as peoples, or we refuse such territoriality and live a kind of ethical detachment from any absolutist claim to a particular land. Land is crucial, land is optional. The stakes are very high with these alternatives, as we all know. On the one hand, to interpret Jesus as disavowing territoriality as inherent to his ministry and collapsing the sacrality, the sacredness, the sacrality of land onto his body forms a theological counter to every geographic eschatology. The life of this anti-territorial Jesus undercuts sacred claims to land for any nation, as well as the theological justifications of any nation to expand its geographic footprint. Yet, on the other hand, to deny the territorial dimension of Jesus' ministry has also supported modern colonialist endeavors by resourcing visions of land as terra nullius, empty lands that are devoid of visible development and therefore of specific claims. The colonial settlers, they loved a deterritorial Jesus. The colonial settlers refused indigenous ideas about the sacrality of land and with it, those territorial claims to specific places. And that is a refusal that we all know continues to this very moment. These alternatives have formed well-worn paths that lead us away from a place of dwelling. These paths move across the earth tone deaf and desensitized to a communicative world that could never be understood rightly if it is understood as property, as territory, as sites of ownership, as fragmented, sliced, negotiated, and bordered. Yet, if we return to Mary, then something different appears to us. The Mother of God bringing her Son all the way down to the dirt. The incarnation is not only God becoming flesh, it is God becoming one with the dirt. Through her hand, leading his hand to that dirt and water, and feeling the heat of the sun, the texture of a plant, and all the delights of taste. Mary anchors our redemption in her Son by drawing embrace all the way down to the bone and the dirt. Our redemption begins not with Jesus as the replacement for the land and place, but as the way to a new embrace. God embracing bone and dirt, and God in place being embraced by the creature. Here with the embrace, we meet the unfolding of the divine life within creaturely life, and creaturely life within the divine life. Another poem entitled Unfolding. Unfolding. Who did you go out to see? Someone dressed differently, wandering in that wilderness, at home with the strange, dancing in open air, perhaps making new day sounds, crisp, bright, bird loud, promised, hoped, forgotten, exhausted. Then he appeared, quickly waving, arms rising and falling, water rising and falling with his arms, slow rumbling from cloudless skies. Not me, he said. You. It is that dynamism of an unfolding of the divine life and the life of the creature that shows us what I call our Calcedonian freedom. Our Calcedonian freedom. It is the freedom revealed with the long-standing mistake of trying to think the natures, divine and human, to make sense of the person. That long-standing mistake. Jesus, the person, the child of Mary, makes sense of the divine and human natures. Yet it makes even more sense to say of Jesus, the person, that he shatters ideas of the natures and the edifices that have formed to define them. And he, through the unfolding, inaugurates the beautiful and slow work of revealing the divine life and creature life. And that work is deeply connected to another beautiful work, turning us toward a new reality of creating divine and human habitation. A new reality of divine and human habitation. The unfolding energizes an invitation to the building, the body, and the design. With Jesus, we are invited to see again and dream again a built environment freed from earth to heaven by enacting a new reality of habitation. So in our next lecture, we will consider the first thing that thwarts that enactment. It is fear. It is fear and the fearful condition woven into the built environment. Thank you very much.